So welcome to the Axe podcast. I'm Hervé, co-founder of Quod AI, and today we're very honored to have the presence of Eugene Cheah from Uilicious talking about his really cool project called InboxKitten. So maybe to start, maybe you can give us an introduction, Eugene. What does InboxKitten do?
I'm Eugene, CTO of Uilicious. So, what does InboxKitten do? It's actually an open source project that we went to develop on our own, as a company, and what it allows you to do is, those annoying emails and things that you subscribe for that you just wish you can just put into a disposable email box and not give your personal email address. That's what it is. If you send any email to, let's say, so and so, some very secret key at inboxkitten.com, you can just go to inboxkitten.com and read those emails. This allows you to sign up for be it like download that PDF, marketing PDF that you need, that wants your email, or more importantly, actually for our use case, is that it allows you to use this inbox to easily test user sign up flows, login flows. So for example, you sign up for something, purchase something for your testing websites. You can just use this InboxKitten mailbox to just test it, and don't need to set up custom emails and things like that. It simplifies those cases because one of the things that it can be a pain at times is like, for example, you want to test sign up every single day. You don't want to keep creating 1,000 Gmail accounts, and that's why it is in essence. The reason why we made it, because we were a testing company, and actually this was a very common customer pain point. So UI is just automate testing. So like for example, we browser automation. You program our platform to run clicks on your website, and then it lets you know whether pass and fail. But one of the most common things people want to test is, can I sign up? Can I log in? And then it's like, oh, I cannot create 100 Gmail accounts. So they have problems using our product because they cannot create email accounts, and that's why we kind of created InboxKitten. And because we thought it was kind of cool, it was a cool and fun project that our team actually did in a very short period of time, that we decided, hey, why don't we just open source it? Because yeah, that's cool.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Yeah, I mean, I've used it a few times to just generate email. As you mentioned, the sign up flow, the login flow. This is something that is continuously tested during build automated acceptance tests, or build acceptance tests, and just having an easy way to check those flows, making sure, for example, you get the verification email or the sign up confirmation. That's great for that. I was really, I read through your blog post, which is really nice. A lot of documentation that you wrote around the story about InboxKitten. And I thought it was fascinating how you came about this idea, which is basically a hackathon. I think you coded it in an impressive 14 hours. And now, after 2 years, it's scaling to over 77 million requests per month. Can you tell us more about the story of how it started and what it is serving today?
I did not do this alone. We had two other employees with me, Jiaming and Shahim. I think you can find their names in the commit history as well. Why did we decide to do? Frankly, it's actually a semi spur in the moment. So that's why it had that very hackathon nature of it. This was actually some time back. So like, as I mentioned, like, because customers have been complaining about not being able to do their test through no fault of our platform. It's just a weird thing. Not having email address. We at first we went into looking into it. It's like, hey, should we somehow create this as a service on our site? But we actually realized that there is effectively free solutions for this. It's just not as ideal. For example, like Gmail. For example, if you have a Gmail account, you can always do the plus symbol or yeah, I think it was the plus symbol before before your first email, and you can generate tons of different email addresses from that. So there are workarounds for this if you would like to achieve it to do so. And so then the goal is not about like how can we turn this into a product, but how can we like make this easy to use and seamless to use. We found actually another similar product called Mailinator. I'm not going to claim originality in this product here, to be clear. Millinator, it does a very similar thing, and the main difference is that the Millinator, according to the terms of service, we cannot automate or use the API. So we wanted to offer something that people could do automation against, and that's where we looked into this. And at the same time, our developers were really interested in like exploring new territory. So this be it new front end techniques, new API technologies, backend. Serverless was the hot thing at this point of time. Nobody could, pretty much everywhere on the Twitter developer universe was talking about serverless at this point in time. So we actually internally within the company, we have a habit of like taking sometimes like small internal projects that for example that is not part of the core system, that can be isolated on its own, especially in a Docker container. And we are like, oh, okay, I'm not saying it's like this is microservice, but it's like since we know the scope of this and there is no real harm in exploring new technologies, I remove the typical CTO restrictions that, hey, it's supposed to do this, it's supposed to use this technology. I will be like, what would you like to explore using this? And you have free reign to do so. And that is why this project ended up being like, hey, we want to try this serverless, try this that serverless, and try this and that. So that's why we actually tried different serverless technology using this same example. It's small, quick, fast, and can be implemented. The code base isn't that big actually. I would argue if you plan it out right, even you, because you're quite a good coder yourself, will implement this within 24 hours. In fact, we spent more time just trying to make the UI look nicer than the actual code in the system. So that became the objective of the project. It's like, let's just make this fun, let's just explore it, let's just try to push it like just in all the fun ways, be it like, let's try to get this to product hunt, let's try to do this. So it became more of an exploration and experimental ground, and let's try to do it within one day, to give that more competitive vibe per se. So the reason for that is also to make sure that they don't treat it like another project within the company. Because one thing, I know it's going to be very ironic saying this as a testing company of all things, but because we are very strict on testing internal quality and checks and controls, right? Pretty much everything that goes on that we launch, right, requires QA to clear, requires all the checks and balances to clear, and we have all the testing processes in place. I mean, standard good software practice. But this is the one time where we are like, hey, go wild, and then we will figure it out after the 24 hours on how to fix any issue and to make sure it's tested. Yeah, it's kind of those kind of situations. So because we've been very strict on it, so on the flip side, these are actually this InboxKitten is not the only kind of project where we run this kind of like, hey, feel free to do what you want here, kind of regime. We actually have a lot of other smaller projects that also runs in the same nature. So that was how it came about. As for scaling it up to 77 million requests, that was not intentional. I think that's the phrasing to state. It's kind of weird. It's kind of weird to phrase it this way, but actually, in hindsight, it makes sense that this free website, free product, open source thingy that we just, hey, let's just do it for fun, receive way more traffic than pretty much everything I ever worked on combined. I'm not even talking about the paid Uilicious stuff. I'm even talking about like past projects that I worked on, and I worked on a lot of projects. So yeah, it's like, it's kind of interesting that it just grew on its own, for better or for worse.
First of all, congratulations on that success. I just, it's just so clear when you get onto that InboxKitten website, what it does, and it's so simple yet powerful, and I think that's why you have so much success with this project. Very easy to understand. So you discussed a bit of the architecture, and kind of removed your CTO hat, as you mentioned, and maybe not think about some of the long-term ilities or non-functional requirements. I think the big decision that you've made, as you mentioned, is serverless, right? And so this could be a hot debate potentially, but would love to know from your side, how did you come to that decision to use serverless? What was the other alternatives that you potentially discussed about during that very short amount of time?
So regarding this, as I mentioned, that this was letting it to be serverless is actually more led in part mostly by the other devs that worked on it, who wanted to work on it, work on such a technology. That being said, I'll let you in on one very small secret right now. It's no longer running on serverless. It's running on Docker containers now. It hasn't been for the past 6 months, I think. uh, but but the code didn't need to change. So 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 well, the initial goal was that right, the benefit is, I would say right, it was also because it was meant to be a learning point. What's the benefit and the strength and the weaknesses of it? Frankly, in one sense, I'm a little bit caught off guard on this, but I actually intended to write a rather lengthy article on comparing the different serverless technologies and their strength and weaknesses of it, because those were really internally made it a learning point of what makes serverless good or bad through this exercise, effectively through this project. Fortunately, I have not written that article, but if I were to summarize it collectively, right? One of the most interesting thing is that there are definitely pros and cons compared to like traditional traditional application servers per se. I will be brutally honest on this. Like, majority of developers, right, working on their server technology backends, right, how many of them will truly run a service that is 24/7 with continuous steady workload? And it's going to be a very small minority. I mean, it is technically the end goal of all startups to be a global technology and used by everywhere around the world, lah. But beyond the startup scene, like take for example in Singapore, you got your MyInfo, you got your banking, you got your digital services. These are all government services the entire country rely on. They don't run 24/7. They sometimes have downtime at 2 a.m. That's the reality of it. And their majority of their workload is not 24/7. It's most of the time within the day. And serverless excels very well if you do not hit a certain minimum threshold of, let's say, 1 million requests per day distributed across the day. This is a very big number. For some people it can be 1,000, for some people it can be 10 million. But if it doesn't hit a certain threshold of the amount of CPU or RAM, it works well because, in a sense, that you don't pay for the time that is not working. That being said, right, there's a huge difference between different serverless technology. For serverless, that you either go to flow, if you really want to reap its benefit. Either your API service is very lightweight in the so your the InboxKitten is in this category. Our serverless backend hardly does anything. It's just reading from one API, connecting the data from another API, massage it, and then output it. So it's extremely lightweight. You either be in this category or you actually be in the other extreme category. Your API request requires a lot of CPU and RAM. Let's say it's generating a giant PDF for one request. The reason why it sits well if you're in either of these two extremes. So in the first one, where you're extremely lightweight, right? And if you're really lightweight, like for example, each request under 10 megabytes, for example, you may like serverless technologies like Cloudflare, for example, they charge per the CPU cycle. They don't charge per second running. So for example, you can have a request that is, let's say, in this case, reading an email and downloading an email and just copying the data over. The CPU cycles is probably less than a few hundred. I'm oversimplifying here, but it can take 10 seconds to download because the client is slow. And you're charged for less than a fraction of a penny because it's only charging the CPU cycle. On the flip side, if you were to do this on AWS, for example, which charge by the per second, there is a downside to it. So for example, if let's say you are connecting with clients, by clients I mean the users, who, let's say, try to download their emails across, let's say, a dial-up connection, and it takes the whole 30 whole seconds. You are going to be billed for that whole 30 seconds for the serverless request. On the flip side, right, if you are generating a giant PDF, which is extremely CPU and RAM intensive, for example, right, you are built for that full 30 seconds and only. And if I were to do it in a non-serverless setup, per se, right, it would actually need to have a extremely large server that is ready on standby for that scenario. Let's say, oh, what if 10 or even 20 or 30 people suddenly creates a PDF in that day, which is very likely, for example, for quite a small, most small medium company. But for the rest of the day, is there a PDF being generated? No. And you're going to purchase that 16 vCPU or 24 vCPU, 32 gigs of RAM server, just sitting down there, not used most of the time. So that's the main strength of it. Now the funny thing is, the reason why we flip it back to Dockers and non-serverless for us, remember I said that if you do not have constant load, this is ideal. We have went way past that stage. We are hitting several hundred thousands of requests consistently every hour. There is a constant load on our servers right now. So much so that we can afford to put dedicated Docker containers on it, and that generally just runs cheaper per request. Past that, frankly, million request trash mark. And that's the thing. And the best part for us was that switch was completely seamless. No one notices it because the API server is written the same thing. We didn't even change a line of code. We just did the build differently and package it differently, and then we deploy differently, and then just change the DNS. And another reason why we also did that is that in the larger scheme of things, because Uilicious runs a lot of browsers, and Chrome, we infamously joke that Chrome hogs a lot of RAM and CPU. Yeah, compared to our entire infrastructure build, the RAM and CPU by InboxKitten is running error by compared to the hundreds and thousands of Chrome instances we run per day. So that was the reason why we end up switching it back to Docker containers once we hit that threshold. And it was interesting in that regards to see the pros and cons accordingly. And also, the only reason why we can switch it seamlessly is because we have our own infra team. That is a factor that is beyond the direct cost benefit of serverless versus non-serverless, that cannot be directly quantified. Because if, let's say, you as a CTO, for example, let's say you're a you're a PhD student who's okay, I just realized how specific this is to you. So, like, let's say you specialize in AI. This is surprisingly very common. You don't know infra, and it's very hard for you to hire someone who knows infra and to educate that person, because you yourself don't know. And you can end up in a situation where, hey, maybe it's better for us to go serverless when it comes to the API server, and that is beyond the dollars and cents. And that is actually one of the major benefits that the serverless audience try to push forward, because it allows you to focus more on the code and less on the infra. In our case, Uilicious is almost 50% an infra company, or give or take. And so that's why we actually do the other direction. We still play around with serverless just because it's fun, to be clear. So we still have a lot of things here and there.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eugene. I really love the sort of the points that you touched on serverless. One being cost, in terms of financial costs, right? As you mentioned, nobody's running services that run that get hits every seconds, basically, right? And the second part is really I guess what some people call in enterprise the total cost of ownership, right? So if you look at not having a DevOps or infra, as you call it, I guess that's what you mean by infra, right? Like DevOps people to be able to deploy the service. I think serverless is great because I guess it removes that complexity of the infrastructure and DevOps, and allows you, that's a cost that's not manifested in terms of your end AWS bill or cloud bill, but it's still manifested in your deployment and your total cost of ownership.
Yep, definitely. Though I would say one of the struggles that some some people or CTOs in the coming from the non-serverless land to the serverless land is the very hard mental switch of realizing that total cost of ownership, because the one of the downsides of serverless, and it's not actually, to be clear, it's actually not the fault of serverless to be here, it's just more of like not being disciplined on the coding side, is that I have seen quite a number of startups that actually just end up having runaway serverless costs, mostly because they didn't control their code quality on it to make sure that it runs lean. But frankly, this would have been a problem in a non-serverless land. It's just that in a non-serverless land, your entire server crashed and your customer complains. In the serverless land, you get a bill and then you cry over the bill. So I wonder which is the lesser of two evil here. It's a very hard to say thing. Yeah. But as a key man, I offer it, the switch will be good.
So what I figured we do now is take a break from the questions and give you a little bit of rest, Eugene, and do a walkthrough of the code of InboxKitten. To do this, we're going to use Quod AI, our code search, to help you find the code you need faster. And I've already logged into my GitHub account, and I'm already associated with the InboxKitten repo, so I can just go ahead and search it right away. It's already been indexed by Quod AI using our AI models. And to get started and to better understand InboxKitten, what I figured we'd do is go over the API endpoints. And Quod AI has already identified those endpoints, so it's really easy to search and find. And what I want to do also is help you, Eugene, a bit with the documentation. And I read your blog post, and essentially when you started with serverless, you started with Firebase, and you migrated to Cloudflare. And I believe it was because of the huge bill that you were getting from Firebase, and also to simplify the billing, or better understand the billing and how serverless platform was charging you. So what we're expecting to find here is really two different types of APIs, one for Firebase and one for Cloudflare. To help you, so let's see this first. So we have the get HTML from email, the list email endpoint, and then getting the URL for the email endpoint. To make my life easier, I'm going to filter the snippets of code by folder, so we only have the Cloudflare APIs. So I'm going to create a collection, which is basically a YouTube playlist of snippets of code, and will serve as documentation. So I'm going to collect and add them, all the endpoints for Cloudflare, into this collection. So let me see, this snippet is about, okay, so this is the error handler response. 8 endpoints, I'm not going to add that. And I'm going to add this one, which, yeah, it looks like it has a response status code for Express. So that's an endpoint. Cool, so now that we've done that, I'm going to do the same thing for, well, actually, let me show you our audience what a collection looks like. This is a collection. So basically, it very much looks like a documentation, but you have snippets of code. Each of the snippets of code represents one of the endpoints from Cloudflare. You have the get HTML content from the email, the list email endpoint. So now, okay, let's do the same thing for Firebase. I'm going to filter the snippets by the Firebase folder and create a new collection for the Firebase mail API this time. So this looks like a endpoint 2, this one 2, and this one 2. All right, let's go back to our collections. Now we have 2 collections, as I mentioned, 2 APIs, Firebase and Cloudflare for the mail API. So what would be really helpful with the endpoints is finding the route. So I'm going to look for the route definition. And because I know you're using Express, you should be importing those files. And so cool, we have the routes for listing mails and getting the emails. So by default, Quod AI searches using AI, so we have a lot of results, but we can always change that by using the code modifier and search for exact code. So now we only have 2 results, and we have the routes for Firebase and Cloudflare. So I'll add this one to Cloudflare. And I'll add, so now that we have all the endpoints, we should have the routing at the bottom, but it'd be nice to bring it all the way up top. So I'll rearrange this because it will give a nice overview to better understand the Firebase APIs. Cool. So now let's have a look to have a better idea of the endpoints. Let's deep dive into one of the endpoints, specifically the email retrieval endpoint. So I think it's get key or get HTML. So we can open that in Quod AI, but we can also, to read the full snippets, but we can also open in VS Code, which I already checked out the code, so I can see that directly in VS Code. So we have some validation at the beginning, the unique identifier for the email, and you basically get the body of the email in HTML or plain text. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. We have the reader variable, which is, I read from your blog post that this is basically a wrapper around the Mailgun API. So this is something that I thought was really interesting from reading your blog post. I discovered this functionality of Mailgun through looking at the code from InboxKitten. Basically, a lot of people, and myself definitely think about Mailgun as this provider to send emails, and I had no idea that they also had a API to actually receive email. So that's very clever. And you're basically using Mailgun as the storage backend for the Mail InboxKitten service. Let's have a little fun. Let's see if InboxKitten supports SendGrid. So if we search for SendGrid here, we're not going to find any results, but Quod AI is able to make some interesting and quite relevant suggestions, like Mailgun, obviously, and the Mail API. So this is kind of like a did you mean search for Google, but for code. Let's search for Mailgun. So we land on the Mailgun wrapper, API wrapper. Cool. So let's now look at another API, maybe the email list API. So I'm going to search for mail list. Okay. And so here we have the mail list API from Firebase. That's the API that's being called when you look at your inbox on InboxKitten. So here you parse the parameters, do some validation, extract the username, the unique username from the email address. And then here you retrieve the emails. And I guess in Mailgun, the emails are called events in their API. Okay, now that we looked at the API, let's have a look at the view side, the front end. So that should be fairly easy. We can just filter the .view files. And here we land on the view that displays your messages, the emails themselves. We have the subject, senders, and then yeah, this is the message, the body of the email, and it's wrapped into an iframe.
Like by choosing Vue, you don't have that sort of like really breadth of ecosystem being able to build native apps potentially from that React.js code. But so, but I'm curious, more curious about Vue. Like, what is like the then if you lose kind of that side of React? I don't
Oh,
want to start a
um,
war, but like what are the big pros for you on the Vue side?
okay, so I actually heard I will actually bring up both sides here. So there was a startup that I helped advise with talk with, right? That that made a very surprising comment for me when they chose to go React first, and that was because given the current recruitment landscape, right, it's very hard to find front end developers, and it's and I don't know about it this year, but at least last year, it was a case that it was significantly easier to hire React than let's say for Angular. I mean, if you go by in terms of recruitment and popularity, this is I'm not fully up to date to this that it is still more popular. So that and mostly because of the enterprises and all that. So this is actually a surprising thing on the other side where it's beyond technical. Sometimes your answers can be beyond technical. And likewise, actually, our preference for Vue is actually inverse of the answer. That is be as well. So like for us, one of the things is that Vue is built very heavily on fundamentals of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Uh, um, the closest comparison of it would be web components, but unfortunately, I'll be honest, web components haven't fully taken off in the way that a lot of people hope it has. And Vue.js is like, I guess, web components like, if you want to think of it that way. And it actually, from a CTO perspective, right, what it means, right, is that if I take anyone from, be it the jQuery era or be it from who has learned the fundamental HTML and CSS, how long will it take for us to train and transit that new hire into being able to be productive on our front end? And we found that Vue is significantly easier to do so than either of the three frameworks, the three popular, be Angular, React as well. And so these are, to be clear, not really technical answers, because sometimes like the most common part of the framework was, right, is that we get lost in the, hey, this loads 0.2 seconds faster, or this is better score on Lighthouse and things like that. But sometimes these decisions might be better made not on pure technical grounds on its own. And that is something that I would like to highlight for Vue, that is the trainability is actually significantly easier. So like compared to like the previous example for React, this actually represents two extremes. Would you like to hire someone who already can start at the beginning, or are you willing to train for that 1-2 months and then convert that person into the platform? And it's completely two different philosophy, I would say, on the company level. And we just chose the later because we felt that that was a better fit for our company.
Yeah, so thank you for that answer. Well, I mean, from what I'm hearing you're saying, and I don't want to start a war, but basically, less steep learning curve for you, as well as the ability to kind of move faster in terms of in the job market. That's very difficult for all tech companies and hiring developers, and the ability to train relatively quickly on Vue over the other frameworks.
Correct. Yeah, I think you can view that way. If someone wanted a simpler one, if money is no object in a company and you want to just hire as many as you can, yeah, sure, go for React, because you find all the developers you need. If it's other situations, that's where you start considering otherwise.
So let's dive into the non-technical part of this episode, or less technical part rather, open source in the future. So would love to talk about how this came to be open source in a little bit more detail. And we touched upon it at the beginning, and specifically about how developers can contribute or get their companies to sponsor or to contribute in some ways to open source development. And as a CTO yourself, I'm curious about what would be the arguments that you would like to hear? What would be the advice that you would give to other developers trying to convince their CTO or their bosses to help with open source on the using the company's time or resources?
I think I'll start with saying that the reason why a lot of companies find it hard to embrace open source, right, is that the open source strategy is easily a long-term plan. We're talking about it takes over a year for any for like a business the business jargon is high return on investment, but it 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 takes over a year for you to see any appreciable value from a business point of view. So, and a lot of corporations, I would say, from my previous working experience working in enterprises, we sometimes jokingly say that there's white elephant projects. Basically the project is created by someone who comes into the company, and then within 2 years we'll just leave, and then it'll be replaced by someone who'll create a new project to replace that previous project. So having a strategy that is open source, right, requires it to be pushed by someone, right, who will be able to like push this within the company for over 2 years, because it takes time, and a lot of people don't have that time. And with the average time a developer stays within a company statistically, it's actually well beyond that. So that's one of the biggest struggle for open source. And as much as I'm trying to support open source in many ways, right, this is a struggle that a lot of developers will face trying to convince their companies. They have to first recognize this. I think the other thing is I will go about is, because since I'm going to give since this might be more nuanced on the company to company level, right, I'll first state what you should not do. So unless you're working on like on the mega project kind of things, right, the likes of Google, Facebook, React, etc., please never try to convince your boss, right, or in my case, because since I'm a CTO, my investors or stakeholder, that it's a means to get free bug fixes. Yeah, because like I'm wearing the hat of someone who does some open source contributions here and there, right? A lot of open source projects that I work on, right, have complaints of commercial companies. We're talking about like the big companies, like the size of, I wouldn't like you can think of it, the big banks, the top 10 in Singapore, the top 10 in the world, coming in and saying, hey, can you have this bug fix like ASAP, because it's having problem in our environment, and not actually sponsoring a dime to the project. And then when we're like, you know what, we are busy with our lives and we want to do other things, and then they make a lot of noise for it. Yeah, we don't put that expectation for your boss, because it sets a very bad tone for open source project. And phrasing it in such a way could potentially detrimentally affect future initiatives for open source. Because unless you're really lucky and you have a really big project, most small and medium projects, right, you won't get a lot of bug fixes, or you get bug fixes for use cases that is not being used in your company. So as far as your company is concerned, it is not there. So he's saying all that, right, how will you convince your boss that? I think the strategy that I did, right, be it for myself internally or to investors or to even other companies that I worked in previously, is I would say first understand what is your company key asset. Because a lot of companies and be it business owners, right, they are scared away to giving away their proprietary secret or whatever, basically the company stuff. They are afraid like, oh, am I just throwing it away, or what my competitors steal it, and things like that. So understand what is your company's secret sauce and competitive advantage. So for example, in my company's use case, Uilicious, our secret sauce is our test engine, where you write in the test commands and it translates into actions on the browser, and then it runs the test. That's one of our secret sauce. And as much as I'm sometimes trying to get it to open source, it's a challenge to convince my investors to do so. Likewise, I'm quite sure for Quod AI's case is the AI system that is doing the search and indexing and then presenting it out. Knowing that is the secret sauce, right, is to know where is your uphill battle in trying to convince your boss. then this it also allows you to rephrase the worst case scenarios. So for example, right, if let's say in my case, this is my secret sauce, right? What is not my secret sauce? Uh, the user system. Login systems are as ancient and bread and butter to every system as there is since the first website ever created. That's not a secret sauce. We could potentially open source our user system. Likewise, InboxKitten in this case, does it has anything to do with our core business? No, it's actually a tool for our customer to better use our system. So for example, if we have an enterprise customer who cannot use inboxkitten.com directly, and they have this same problem that is solving, say, hey, you could just fork our code and deploy in your system. This allows you to reframe that, hey, this project and this product that you want to open source has, in the worst case scenario, if even every competitor clone my InboxKitten, for example, it has no impact to us. And that allows people to, hey, okay, maybe there is no major downside. Then subsequently you start focusing on the upside. So like I said, our enterprise customer could potentially use this project without any issue. Don't need to clear compliance, don't need to clear a long list of things. We can once you also mitigate the downside, you can also like start emphasizing on the plus side. Like for example, you can start saying that it extends the life of the project, because sometimes in non-obvious ways, like for us, right, when we do something open source, right, we really aim to make it like deployable by anyone. So that means full documentation, how-to guides, and etc. And and this is, I think for some for our case on Quod AI, you have understood that the surprisingly in enterprise, a lot of code bases don't even have a proper README at the front. and this act and discipline of like, hey, putting it out in the open, and someone like, hey, how do I do this? How I do that? Allows you to make those fixes on this project, so that the next developer 6 years down the road, right, will not be facing into the void, trying to figure this out. And other things could be like developer and team happiness, because generally the developers are happier working on open source code, and they like seeing that their commits are now public. They can share it. A lot of developers want to share their code. I mean, they want to share what they work on, and if they're working on proprietary bank system, they can't, and it's frustrating. And I'm speaking of myself there, actually. Yeah. So the thing is, because of all this, right, ironically, for us at Uilicious, right, we actually have an open source pipeline. InboxKitten is not the only thing we open source. We have a few other things that we are open source, and we have various stages of open source. It's in fact, the pipeline is a backlog of to-dos to release it, because for us our standard is there are a few stages. So one is like, hey, we just put it there, but as what we experienced, just putting your code there and having zero how to use it is useless. No one's going to use it. The next step is to actually document it, and that is actually a to-do. So we have projects that are actually lined up to be open source and released like within the next 6 months or the next 1 year, hopefully, unless there's other priorities. And once we complete those documentation, and we even for now, we do reap the benefits. So for example, like for in this case, InboxKitten, it at any point in time, it represents 5% to 10% of our inbound new traffic. There are random QAs that just, hey, I need to test a sign up flow with a new email. And then they heard from a friend to use this. And then later on they heard about Uilicious. It is a direct business benefit. So it's always about like phrasing it and framing that way. That is the best way to convince, because it's all about, hey, there's no real losses and there's potential benefits. And that makes it significantly easier.
Thank you, Eugene. That was a really thorough and detailed answer. I love what you said. So if I hear you correctly, one, I guess if you have to bring this to your CTO or your boss or your engineering manager, really the idea is, what is the business benefit, right, for the companies to do this? And as you mentioned, if it's not core to what you do, that's a potential opportunity there for the code to be open source. And for your specific purpose, for you, Uilicious, is to bring in more customers and also make it easier for helping your customers with an easier installation. Number two,
Exactly.
I think, yeah.
Go
Number
on.
two, bringing the project to a level where collaboration is much easier. Leveling up documentation, making it easier for people to just onboard, to try the project, and to contribute to it. Which is, I guess, from the CTO perspective, it's like, well, better quality, better maintainability of the project, easier onboarding for people who may want to join the project. So that's a good point from something good to hear from the CTO side or director of engineering. And the third point that you bring in, which I think is more essential now than ever, is developer happiness. Basically, having the pride of seeing your project kind of being available and shared to other people, and have the ability for developers to kind of, if you will, brag about what they're doing and showcase what they're doing. Cool. Well, thank you for sharing your views on open source, and you're a great contributor to it. And I'd love to hear that actually that advise me for our sense. The last question on the sort of like open source and future. I read on your roadmap that for InboxKitten that you want to integrate with more serverless paths. Is there? I guess you'll explain why you're laughing. But anything else we can look forward to?
Okay, so I guess this is the part where, like, if any of you would like to contribute and test this service, use this service on another serverless platform, please do the change and submit the pull request. Yes, that has to be on the to-do for, I think, over the 2 years. Yeah, because I would actually like to explore, but this is on a more personal basis, explore more serverless platform. There has been a lot of new ones, and things have changed drastically since the release of this project. And it's not just Cloudflare or your standard AWS. There are multiple startups that do completely different building models and all together. And I would actually like to see that happening. And I would like to see where else this project can be deployed to. I think what I really like about this project is that, okay, how about I phrase it? If someone make a drastic change, and is being able to deploy another project, I might be willing to just spend that $100 and $200 giving it a test run onto that new environment. I'm sorry to any future users if we crash in the process, but it will allow us to explore new serverless frameworks there. And yeah, at some point I really do want to write that article comparing every single serverless platform out there, because it's so nuanced. And the best part about this project is it has real production workload, and I'm not going to say like this is benchmark of fluffy numbers. I'm not doing a million synthetic requests. No, this is a million real users 24/7.
You can run a contest on InboxKitten to offer a free Quod AI shirt for people that would contribute specifically for that for adding another integration to a serverless platform.
Sure.
And
I could even throw in mine freebies on top of that.
oh yeah, we can do both actually. Thank you so much, Eugene. I'm just like asking, I'm just curious about 2 quick questions towards the end, more about productivity. What's your favorite dev tool? Just out of the bat, like no thinking.
Okay, so this one I'll just be quick. Have you heard of coder.com? I mean, not coder, the coder. Is it coder.com?
The Coda, CODA.
Yeah, CODER. Okay, more specifically, their Docker Hub project. Yeah, the developer workspace platform. They do have a Docker Hub, a self-hosted version, Docker Hub, on Docker Hub, where you can effectively deploy any Visual Studio Code IDE on a server.
Yeah, I've seen this actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite popular. I mean, a version of this is quite popular on GitHub, where you can open any GitHub repo and code on it immediately. I pretty much daily drive this. It means I can code anywhere, anytime, on any device. When I was doing my army reservice for Singapore, I was doing code changes on my iPad. There is quotes, but the best part is I'm no longer bound to a specific device per se, and I can make
Yeah.
and from a productivity standpoint, I can basically code anywhere, even on the beach if I need to. And the biggest benefit is that because I run this on a rather heavy server, because I also do VM work and things like that. It's like I can run it. You can run it on the go, with be it you want 1 TB of NVMe SSD, 512 gigs of RAM, 32 vCPU. How high do you want to go? because that's effectively the specs that I run on yeah, from my home server. So that was a huge productivity hack for me, to be able to do that anywhere, anytime.
Do you have a productivity hack for as a developer? Like, is there like some, I guess, like keyboard shortcut or plugin that you really like, or something that you do that's that you that makes you that saves you time or makes you more productive?
I think one of the things that I noticed, especially for junior devs, right? For junior devs in the dev environment, right, is to constantly think and rationalize your flow of data in a of web. I'm assuming a web app service. Yeah, if you're not working on web applications, this statement might not translate well. But to visualize your flow of data from the UI all the way down the database and back up to whatever services, draw charts on it, draw diagrams on it. If it need be, it helps a lot. Especially, I think the struggle is that as more and more companies split as microservice grows more popular, there is benefits and it's a separate discussion on its own. Um, that flow of data gets more and more complicated, and you need to know that flow of data to fix your bugs. Is you always the when flow of data breaks, right? It's always those bugs that haunts you the most. And one of the things that I realize a lot of people is very scared to do, even if it's in the dev environment, the willingness to switch off and break services. Because sometimes when you're trying to debug these things, right, the most drastic solution you can do is yank out one of the services and see did it break accordingly. Because sometimes if your bugs are, especially when it comes to those weird bugs, right, like if you break the correct service, right, it can reveal a lot about what is going on. If let's say you end up in a situation where you switch off something and you don't see the error, maybe the error is happening a layer above whatever you just switched off. And that's weird because you should be seeing this giant arrow that you just switched off this item. And people spend days, weeks, not like trying to solve this, but not willing to try this very scary thing. And one of the recurring things that I'll just come in to sometimes the devs is like, why don't you just try switching that off and see whether that your theory is true? And then they're like, I can switch off, but other developers are using it. Yeah, it's a very scary thing. It's like I appreciate the fear because I want you to be fully terrified of doing that in production, but dev, that's your playground. You can do this.
Yeah, so I guess what you're saying in a way, I don't know if it's going to be a good analogy, but your breakpoint across architecture and microservices is just turn off one of the one of the VM or one of the services in the middle. That's a way
Yeah.
to do breakpoint.
But I think the prelude for that is you need to map out in your head or be on a piece of paper, because it can be difficult to map out in the head where the data flows. That's an exercise that I sometimes do for the developers, because I realize a lot of people struggle to actually visualize the flow of data.
Yeah, totally agree.
Will Quad AI
Great.
generate such a chart for us?
It
Here
may,
is
it
your
may
flow
come.
of
We
data.
have we do have a lot of architectural endpoints already detected, as you noticed. So
Ooh,
great.
juicy.
Maybe that's not going to be the next feature for next year, the big feature. Eugene, thank you so much for being a guest on our show. Really fun topic. We discussed a lot of technology that are quite interesting, debated or not debated, but really have a somewhat of a really pleasant conversation about some of the pros and cons of different technologies, and most importantly, your advice for young developers and open source. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And we can find your project at Uilicious InboxKitten, and also I guess I'll post your contact information on the podcast itself. And yeah, thank you so much.
Yeah, I think my Twitter name will be somewhere here, or somewhere, depending on where Herb decides to put it.
If you like this episode of the Axe podcast, give us a like and subscribe. Each episode, we explore a new and cool open source project. If you have any suggestions, please leave a comment in the section below. I will see you in the next episode. Bye.